Good evening, YouTube live audience. So glad to see each of you on this awesome Wednesday, June 29th. Wednesday, June 29th, the time of my actual sixth YouTube. And I want to thank everybody for joining. Several developments happened this week, uh, particularly with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And then after you had the overturn of Roe v. Wade, you had um, consequences. But I mean, when you look at the background and you look at studies about the plaintiff, Norma uh, Norma McGreevy, it's an amazing story. I hope I got her um, last name right. So stay tuned while I prepare for this live YouTube. Glad to see everybody. Please comment, like, and subscribe. I encourage you to comment, like, and subscribe. I got to make sure I got the audio going and you could hear me clearly. So glad that we're able to do this right now. And I'm excited to be with you. I'm glad to be back. I meant to do this earlier on a Sunday. However, it was just one thing after another in terms of preparing and in terms of making sure the content is together. So I'm grateful to see you on this sixth YouTube live that I'm getting ready to start right now. Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Please comment, please like, please subscribe on this Wednesday, June 29th. We're entering Cancer season, Cancer 2022. How was Cancer 2022 feeling to you? Don't hesitate to comment. Last week, Salifu commented, and I thank you, Salifu, for your comment. Just have several points to make in a half an hour. I won't hold you. And if you've been blessed, if you learned something that you plan to use, don't hesitate to bless me with my Cash App. My Cash App is $, my name, Ron Fraser. And look out for my new book coming out about the work of Dr. Tony Martin, historian and literary scholar, literary critic, and he worked different fields besides history and besides literature, economy and politics, political science. So I'm excited that this book is going to be coming out by the end of the year. And it's about the books, the over 12 books written by Tony Martin. So I want to get started today talking about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. This was a big step back that the Supreme Court chose to make. And when you look at the composition of the Supreme Court and you remember how it was composed, what really strikes me, this whole overturning of Roe v. Wade is a consequence of Democrats not standing up when they could have. Obama could have made an emergency appointment when he was in office, when he had nominated Merrick Garland, and Mitch McConnell said, "We don't care if you have a Supreme Court nominee." That was when I believe Souter had retired. And Obama let Mitch McConnell win that battle. He should not have. He should have used his executive power to put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court. Instead, Trump was able to appoint 3 whole justices. So then because of that, now we have the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And it's a huge step back. I think it encourages irresponsible behavior among men, because what it does is it just puts all the burden on women when it comes to the conception of a child. None of the burden is on the men. The men are encouraged, to just, do whatever they want to do with women. And then when it's time to deal with the consequences of a childbirth, the government is saying, good luck to you. And Jamaica then said, "Dagi to sopa for the woman. Woman, sorry for you. You have to go find, if you don't want to have baby, you better go run, find somebody. We can't give you some little root, some little bush, or you have to go run on one next state if the state you happen to live in doesn't allow you." So it's just a big, huge step back. But, this wouldn't have happened if the Democrats had backbone, if Obama had backbone and made sure he had emergency appointed Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court when he had the opportunity. He chose not to, and now we did. So I look at not only Obama, I look at Biden. Biden ignored Anita Hill. even though I totally disagreed with the way Anita Hill discredited Clarence Thomas. She should not have listened to Emma Coleman Jackson. Anita Hill should not have listened to Charles Ogletree. She should have stuck to her guns and said, no, I'm going to stick to legally why this is not, in terms of his decisions, he's a rubber stamp. That's all Clarence Thomas is, a rubber stamp for corporations. I'm not going to talk about however I felt sexually. I just thought that ruined the whole case, and it allowed him to be confirmed because they did not stick. It was Dianne Feinstein's office back in the early 90s that tried to delegitimize Clarence Thomas by saying he was sexually inappropriate. I think that was the wrong direction. That was the absolute. And then they did the same thing with trying to delegitimize Brett Kavanaugh, and that's why they failed in that respect too. So the Democrats repeatedly fail over. I mean, I could write a 10,000-page dissertation on how the liberal Democrats routinely fail working class people. Routinely fail work. It's like whatever plan they have, it's a deliberately failing plan, just like the plan to try and impeach Trump. Never mentioned how Trump was violating the emoluments clause, but chose to focus on some obscure phone call, and it failed. So their game plan always fails, and then after a while you realize, oh, it's kind of set up to fail, and then you really take a step back. But this Roe v. Wade decision, what's fascinating to me is also the story of Roe v. Wade. And I just saw an interview Susan Swain did on C-SPAN with the author of the book, The Family Roe, An American Story. And there was one part of it that really struck me. The author is Joshua Prager. And the part of the story that really struck me came up in the second chapter. Prager writes, Norma, and that is the plaintiff, she is the original Jane Roe, who brought this case, who was encouraged to brought this case. And the story that Joshua Prager tells is how Norma, who would later have a same-sex relationship later in her life, her story was so fascinating to me because she represented like a full American experience, but one that's been used, by conservative elements of the Federalist Society, conservative judges to overturn, conservative judges to deny women their reproductive rights. And what Prager writes here is that Norma would later reject that discomforting fact. And this is Mary, the discomforting fact, what I meant to get in this part is her mother, Mary, saying that she, Mary, adopted the child that Norma had, the original Jane Roe, because Norma didn't want her. And these are stories that, this is yet another example of how we got to make sure that, for me, what Roe v. Wade highlights is that because the government has shown it will make women's reproductive rights more difficult for women to have, this is a lesson for all of us to make sure who we're choosing to sleep with, we're conscious about who we're sleeping with. And if we are sleeping with them, we're conscious about the consequences. If you're a man and you don't want to have kids, if you're later in life, you can have a vasectomy. If you're a woman and you don't want to have kids, there is a variety of contraceptives. But now that we see that the government, has pushed back, has overturned Roe v. Wade, we got to be clear that we should not be having children that we don't want. We should not be having children that we don't want. And I can't help. I had texted to two of my neighbors that video that's gone viral of the mother of more than one child basically yelling at one of her children's father for bringing McDonald's burgers and fries only for his child. And I just find this, I told my neighbors, I said, this is relevant to the Roe v. Wade case. Y'all got to watch that video. I don't really show videos just yet here on my live YouTube, but everybody watch that McDonald's video, McDonald's baby mama, baby daddy video, I would like to call it, because it's so relevant to what it means to have a child that you want, rather than having a child because I think, as my godbrother told me, dealing with a baby mama of more than one child, that certain women have baby to get money from the government. And so when you do that, you put yourself in a position where it's your sole responsibility. You basically told the father you don't want him and you don't need him. And it creates chaos. It does not allow for a child to be raised in a conscious way. And if this overturning of Roe v. Wade has taught us anything, we have to be, as Nas said, conscious of the way we raise our daughters. We have to be more conscious of the way we raise our sons, the way we raise our daughters. And I was dealing with this in the very first book I wrote, called Pauline Hopkins and Advocacy Journalism. She was an amazing, amazing journalist, amazing novelist. And one of the things, the first novel she wrote was about her mom's dad, Jesse Allen. And just the story she told just reminds me about how people back in the day, same thing like today, you have to be conscious. Whoever in life you choose to have a child with should be somebody who is conscious. And to this day, I'm 42 years old. I do not have a child because I have not met a woman, although I am homosexual. I have not met in my life, in my 42 years, a woman where I can say, I will fight to see, if we can have a child. I'll make an effort because this woman is conscious. So it just boggles me how when we see these videos that go viral, like the McDonald's baby mama and the McDonald's baby daddy just fighting, and she's telling him, you need to bring McDonald's food not only for your biological child, but this is what the McDonald's baby mama tells one of the child's fathers. You need to bring McDonald's and it's clear economically, he may have it, he may not, but on principle, he's like, no, I'm not bringing food for your other children. He said in the video, that's your responsibility. But it's also his responsibility to be conscious of the kind of woman he chooses to have a child with. Because if he was more conscious, he wouldn't be in an argument in a video going viral with a woman who has several different baby fathers. So this whole Roe v. Wade is bringing up this, you got to be conscious. Now that we see the government is making it harder on women to be able to have control over reproductive health, we must be conscious of the parents, of the people we choose to have and conceive children with. We must be conscious about the people we choose to have children with. This excerpt of my book, she's talking about her mom's dad, Jesse Allen. And yes, the fictional character in her novel is called Jesse Montfort. Jesse Montfort made a decision, talking about being conscious over, really talking about her grandfather, right? Jesse Montfort, who Jesse Allen is based on, made a decision to start a family with a woman that he knew stood on the radical abolitionist side of the slavery question. Okay, now I can give you so many stories about women who, if I was straight or if I was gay, I would try to be straight because of the fact that they're so conscious. And I want this kind of woman to raise my child because I see where her mind is. In the time of Hopkins's grandfather, which was before her time, which was in the early 1800s, like 1800 to 1810, slavery was rife. But what kind of mindset, was he thinking about that he wanted his wife to have, the child's mother to have? The Underground Railroad was in its early stages, and that was part of a network that was bringing slaves from the chattels from the South, into the North. Is she conscious about creating more free minds? Is she conscious about the need for Black people to emancipate themselves from mental slavery? Is she conscious about what Pan-Africanism is? Is she conscious about who Shahrazad Ali is? Is she conscious about who Toni Morrison is? I remember I was talking with a Black woman recently in the past month, and she said, I don't know who Toni Morrison is. And I said, in my mind, never should this woman conceive a child. I didn't tell her that, but that's what I was thinking. You have to, as men, we have to raise our sons to choose conscious partners to have children with. We must choose. That's what this whole Roe v. Wade is all about. That's what this McDonald's baby mama and McDonald's baby daddy viral video going viral is all about. These are the consequences of what happens when you do not choose consciously who you choose to have a baby with. You must be conscious about who you choose to have a baby with. And so this part really really struck me, because this is what I'm saying about the novel. What I'm saying about the novel is it follows, the novel tells the story of Jesse Montfort's experience, his experience to consciously choose a child, uh, a child's mother who was in the Underground Railroad. He wouldn't choose a wife who unapologetically believed in slavery, who unapologetically passed and didn't care about Black men, didn't care about the oppression of Black people. He didn't choose a partner like that. He chose a conscious partner. So if anything, Roe v. Wade is, and of course, my definition of consciousness is different from the founder of the Jehovah's Witness Church, because that was the church that Norma, the original plaintiff in Roe v. Wade, came from. She was raised in the Jehovah's Witness Church. So it's a different, when I'm talking about consciousness, is not, leader of a Jehovah's Witness church. I'm talking about those principles taught by Elijah Muhammad, Marcus Garvey. I'm talking about those principles. That's what I mean by consciousness, not trying to, follow the New World Order. Okay, and I'll get to that later. I wanted to really look up these issues of choosing conscious partners versus non-conscious partners is part of the work that I, not only as a writer, but I as a playwright, I as a director, as a play director, and Facebook just reminded me today that it was 10 years ago, in 2012, that I had put this flyer up in Philadelphia. I had directed the Philadelphia premiere of Sonia Sanchez's 1971 play called Dirty Hearts. And it's really also dealing with this issue, this question of the consequences of having a conscious partner. And so the main character in Sonia Sanchez's play is Carl, right? Which was brilliantly, memorably played by Dax Richardson, performed the role of Carl in this play that I directed. And you see the consequences of him choosing to be with a conscious Black woman. And so what Sanchez does is a group of people that really represent their racial groups are sitting at a table, playing a game of hearts. And if you know anything about hearts, if you get the spade, you lose. Your hand is the lowest and you will not win in that round. And so Sanchez shows the drama, the consequences of always being dealt the spade. Carl was always dealt the spade. But that matched his mindset because he chose not to give up on his Black queen. He chose not to deny his culture. And he chose to be proud of who he was. And so Sanchez, the play is really written as a response to Nixon's Black capitalism, basically putting Black people in a space and a function of a white supremacist economy. That's the whole play, right? But it still chooses, and if you're not a strong person to deal with always being dealt with the spade, you will think that that play is a defeatist play, that it is Afro-pessimist, that it is nihilist, and it's not that. It's just showing you these are the boundaries of the game, the so-called game, the quote-unquote system. And it's a profound play that I had the pleasure of directing. And I was so grateful that Professor Sanchez came to the rehearsal 1 week before we opened at the Adrian Theater. About 10 years after that, I'm still directing plays, directed my own play, also with a powerful scene dealing with a woman's difficult decision to choose to abort a child, And in this play that I wrote, there's a powerful scene when Amy Ashwood Garvey, the first wife of Marcus Garvey, makes that difficult decision. And so many people read my play, and very respected historians read my play. And they both, correctly came to the realization in that scene, because there's a scene in this play that I wrote where Amy Ashwood makes a fateful decision to not carry a child to term. And the question is open. I got that scene. I learned how to write that scene after, watching a lot of plays, but also reading Lionel Yard's biography. He wrote a biography in 1990 of Amy Ashwood Garvey. And he says one of the fateful times in her life when she felt most alone was in that Harlem hospital room in June of 1920, when 3 months prior, Garvey chose to leave her and to be with another woman that she introduced to him that was her bridesmaid, Amy Jakes Garvey. And just dealing with that, dealing with the loneliness. But I show the spiritual elements that were part of her kombolo in Jamaica, them say, part of her spiritual group that was able to really motivate her and to, despite getting rid of the child in that scene, in that time, in that June 1920 painful month of her life, she was still supported by those elements, like her father, especially, that motivated her to get up out of the bed and to fight for what she believes in. And she fought for what she believed she deserved. That's why she got what she got in the divorce trial. But the play is a testament, just like A Raisin in the Sun. And I had posted on my IG that scene in The Raisin in the Sun when the son Travis bursts in talking about a rat. Hansberry read Richard Wright, so I know she wrote that scene after reading Richard Wright's Native Son, which, if you remember, begins with a rat in an apartment, but the rat is like the human being. It's like the black person trying to survive in the city. And so Travis bursts in, telling his mom about this rat, fat as a cat, and taking a broom and hitting it and the rat jumping up. And all of this after his mother, he's telling his mother this after now the son doesn't know, after the mother comes back to the apartment after giving the doctor a down payment for an abortion, giving the doctor a down payment to get rid of a child that she has already conceived with Travis's father, Walter. So when she sees, when Ruth, Travis's mom, sees Travis talk about this rat, bloodied and beat up, she grabs him. And that's one of the scenes that I remember first watching. My dad rented A Raisin in the Sun when it first came out on VHS in 1990. He rented it from Blockbuster Video. I'll never forget when he rented it, and we all sat down and watched that scene, and we just took it all in. Hansberry was somebody who taught me, by the way she wrote that and by the incredible way Starletta Dupois performed that having a child is not a light choice. Choosing to conceive a child with somebody is not something that should be taken lightly. It should be taken seriously. That's why you have to be conscious about who you choose to conceive a child with, especially after this overturning, especially now that we see that the government is making it much harder for women to have control over their health. So I just want to thank Hansberry for doing that, because I can't even tell you the effect that watching that scene had on me and my sister, because we all took it in. We took in Starletta, the way her performance of Ruth, captured what Hansberry intended, the real shame. There's an amazing amount of shame that comes with having to know that you're aborting a child. I was on a megabus. I'll never forget a conversation with this, I would say, Hispanic woman. I could tell she spoke Spanish. I was going from Philly to DC, and she just grabbed me up and she said, look, women know when they're not supposed to have children, or when they're having a children with somebody that they shouldn't be. And she just looked at me to say, do you hear what I'm saying, brother? And she treated me like, a brother. And I just had to shut up, because I was telling her, I was just repeating, the liberal talking points about, the Republicans taking away rights. But in her mind, she saw it as a blessing, because she, was taking a religious standpoint as to why abortion in her mind should be outlawed. But I still, like I said, the whole point of the overturning of Roe v. Wade is to encourage all of us, encourage parents of children, teach your children to raise, to look for conscious partners, choose conscious partners to have your child with, choose conscious partners to have your child with, not unconscious. I think I said it best. I heard it from Paul Rubin, who was a friend of the Robeson family. And the story he tells when he visited the Robeson house, Paul Rubin visited it with his daughter, and his parents were personal friends of the Robesons. And he tells me the story of how Paul Robeson vetted his father. Okay, he said he asked his father a series of questions about Africa. Well, what do you think about? And what Paul Robeson was doing was to see where this man stood on anti-colonialism. And Paul Rubin basically told me that his dad passed Paul Robeson's test because he clearly was educated on the reasons these anti-colonial uprisings were happening. If you can't even have, this is why, fathers are so hard on sons, because this whole culture encourages us to be absolutely ignorant of anything happening outside of the nation, much less, Pan-African struggles, or to be aware of who Nelson Mandela was. Where is the country of Kenya? What are the anti-colonial uprisings that happen on the West Coast? That's what I call conscious. You have to be conscious. So Roe v. Wade, we got to make sure, because the people who supported that decision, they're already on their game. They're on code. They're on the same team, and that team is winning. We got to get on our code. We have to understand this is a call to make sure we're not irresponsible. And that brings me to the incredible Cancer who's born on this day, Wednesday, June 29th, and also an incredible Cancer woman who was born on this day, although some sources say the 26th, that I met personally, Nahanda Abiodun, who I met twice. God rest your soul. Thank you for pouring such positivity in my life, Nahanda. Born around the same time as Kwame Ture, June 29th, 1941 in Trinidad. So what I'm showing is a review that I wrote of a biography that is definitely promoted by the mainstream. Peniel Joseph's biography, all these places interviewed him for it. And his biography is like the exalted word, but please do not use that, okay? What's better, I'm going to, it's over there. I do have the book. It's a 700-page book, but y'all don't worry about how long it is. Just understand that when you read it, you're getting more conscious information. Instead of reading Peniel Joseph's biography, read Kwame Ture's autobiography from his own words, all right? Read Kwame Ture's own words, and it's actually a transcription of Ekwueme Michael Thelwell's interview with him that they did in the second to last and last year of his life, okay? It's called Ready for Revolution, and what I'm showing now is a book review that I did of Peniel Joseph's biography in the context of Kwame Ture's autobiography, all right? Because a lot of discrepancies that does not properly represent what Kwame Ture believed and what he did. So I'm just going to read this part here. Peniel Joseph, the biographer, makes his fundamental difference in worldview. This is what happens when you have a European worldview telling an African story. It's confusing, it's incorrect, and it's distorted. So Joseph is really looking, as I say later in this review, at Kwame Ture's life from a European perspective, or from J. Edgar Hoover's perspective, when he says certain things. This in particular, Joseph writes, he makes his fundamental difference in worldview from Ture very clear when in Stokely, he calls Castro's initial 53 attack on the Moncada barracks that's in Cuba that led to the January 1st, 1959 revolution. Joseph said Kwame called that attack ill-fated. That's what Joseph said of Kwame Ture. That's a distortion. That's not what Kwame Ture believed. Ture, in his 24th chapter, celebrated the Cuban Revolution and the events leading up to it. The government and the people of Cuba were busy trying to liberate their society from the inherited historical distortions and injustices. Kwame Ture says, this is from his autobiography, coming from slavery, the racism of a plantation economy, capitalist exploitation, and a colonial relationship with Los Imperialismos Yanquis, the United States, a process I very much wanted to see for myself, period, end quote. And I'm writing now, there's nothing that Ture found ill-fated about Castro's initial attack. of the Moncada barracks. And by this chapter, Joseph establishes himself as an absolutely unreliable narrator. I'm remembering Marlon James's podcast about the unreliable narrator. Sometimes they're attractive. To me, they're attractive because I just they remind me of real snooty prep school boys, black and white, but they all think the same, in terms of standards of beauty, in terms of how they think government should be run, in terms of their blind loyalty to Washington and Wall Street. So that's what makes them attractive. It's like, wow, y'all really believe, in those in those democratic capitalist ideas. Okay. Joseph also disparages the Garvey movement when he writes, Carmichael's promise that a return to Africa remains the ultimate goal expressed more of a personal desire than a collective sentiment. It was a collective sentiment. It's not a personal desire. It's something that he carried out by literally going to living in Guinea. So the final paragraph here, Joseph, like J. Edgar Hoover, tries to downplay the collective sentiment that Garvey inspired in 1920 among Black people. Ture mentions Marcus Garvey as part of an honor roll of influential Black thinkers who were either imprisoned or sent into exile. Equally questionable are Joseph's claims that Ture called African leaders worthless, since his sources for these claims in his 13th chapter, Africa on the World Stage, are Washington Post articles. And, the Washington Post was hostile to people like Ture. Ture even says that the Washington Post was in part responsible for the murders of Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney because of how they reported it. Ture writes about how the Washington Post was a paper that was hostile to his views, and accused him and other SNCC members of setting up Andrew Schwerner, when really Kwame Ture says they set those people up, those victims up. So what Cancer Season really just reveals, and then he also recognizes Assata Shakur and her efforts to really treat his prostate cancer when he visited Cuba, and his acknowledgement of the moon, his respect for the moon, which, as we know, is what all Cancerians are ruled by, what the planet Earth is ruled by in its orbit around the sun. Its heaviest influence at this time is by the moon. So we're grateful for Kwame Ture, who also in his whole story teaches us what it looks like to choose conscious partners. He was one who married Miriam Makeba, who believed in a free Africa, who believed in a free South Africa. And he demonstrated a life of what conscious partnership looks like. He demonstrated what that looks like. And shout out to those adults who demonstrate having conscious partners, not those adults who will tell you that everything in life is the problem of the result of the opposite sex and all women are bad or all men are bad. No, that's never true. We are the result of our choices. We are the consequences. We are where we are because of the consequences of our choices. And if anybody else's lives tell us that, it's Assata Shakur's life, and it's definitely the life of Kwame Ture. So we're grateful. I've reached my time. Thank you for your indulgence. Please like, share, subscribe my live YouTube. God bless you.